It is great to be with you this morning. Great to be in the house of God and spending time together with him. And as we turn now to his word, if you do not have a Bible with you and you would like to follow along, if you don't have a Bible with you and you're not sure, put your hand up anyway. And one of the welcome team will bring you a Bible. It'd be great for you to be able to follow along with what we're looking at instead of just taking my word for it, because I might be lying to you. Not planning to or trying to, but it's a good principle to try and be testing these things and checking them for ourselves. So we are in a series looking at the book of Deuteronomy, and it's under the heading of Choose Life. The people of God at this pivotal moment in their history, about to enter the promised land, and God laying some challenges before them and saying, how are you going to live as my people when you're there? Will you choose me? Will you choose life? Will you choose love? Will you choose all the things, or will you choose to go your own way yet again? So that's been the story so far, and surprisingly, even though we're 4 weeks into this series, we still haven't got to the main block of Deuteronomy, which is the big section where the law is re-given and the law is explained again. All the legal details and explaining what they should do and what they shouldn't do and all that kind of stuff. We're going to be diving into some of that next week, but actually in this series, we're not going to be ploughing into all of the depths and intricacies and details of all of those legal code, as fascinating as that would be. But instead of that, we are going to be having, it'll come up on the screen in a moment, a workshop evening. A week tomorrow, we're going to be having an evening looking at all of that stuff to do with the law. All of that stuff to do with how we read it, how we understand it. Should we be following it still? Which bits do we follow? Which bits don't we follow? How do we work out the difference? Because obviously a lot has happened between the time the law has given and where we are now. The life of Jesus has transformed our understanding of it. But does that mean it doesn't apply? Does it mean it should apply, but only parts of it? We're going to be exploring some of those questions together in a sort of workshop-style evening. That's going to be a week tomorrow, and you can sign up for that via the website, or come and talk to me afterwards if you'd like to know a little bit more about that. But today, before we get to that sort of legal code bit, God wants again to ask the people to make a choice. And he wants to ask the people to make a choice about how they are going to approach that law once it is given to them again. What's their heart going to be towards it? The title of this morning's message, the title of this morning is about choosing God's ways. It's choosing God's way instead of our way. A couple of weeks ago, we looked at the idea of obedience. We looked at this option and this choice about whether we are going to be obedient to God in our lives. Today is similar, but instead of it just being about, the slides are up, fantastic, thank you, Malcolm. Instead of it just being about the letter of the law and whether we are going to keep that letter of the law in obedience, today is about something much deeper. Because actually, the way that God wants his people to engage with the law is not just about following rules and regulations. It's about having their heart shaped by it. It's about the heart of the law, not the letter of the law. I'm going to read a passage from Deuteronomy chapter 10 in a moment. But before I do, just to give us a sort of framework to think about it, I want to think about this almost in terms of when it comes around to election season and we get our party manifestos through the door, or people knocking on our doors, giving them to us and talking about them. Because in a party manifesto, there's lots of details given about what policies and what things the party is pledging that they will do. But actually the point of the manifesto is not just so that we can understand all of the details and facts and figures and plans and policies and all that kind of stuff. The purpose of the manifesto, through giving all of that information, is that we would understand what it is that motivates those parties and which party it is that we are therefore most in line with. We'll never get a handle on every single policy and never find a party that we agree with on everything. So whose heart do we trust the most? Just to massively oversimplify it down, if the two issues that these manifestos were talking about was how we're going to deal with the economy and how we're going to provide services for people. I know there's far more in a manifesto than that, but if those were the two things, and if in one manifesto you had a party saying we are going to strengthen the economy, we're going to keep our economy safe, we're going to make sure we've got more in reserves, the economy is going to be strong, and in the section about services offered to people, it said we're going to make sure that we're not spending too much on those services because we need to keep our economy strong. We would get an idea of what the heart for that party was. If there was only two parties, if the other party said, well, in the economy, we're going to actually raise some taxes, we're going to make some increases there so that we've got money, because the important thing is that we want to be able to spend money on the services that we offer people, we get a sense of the different hearts. And then our job as a voter is to say, which of those two things aligns most with ours? Are we economy people who want to strengthen that, or are we primarily people who want to be offering services? And that is a massive oversimplification of our politics. But the point I'm trying to make is that the point of these manifestos is not just to give us details and facts and figures. It's to help us understand what motivates the people who are saying this is the way we want to live. And far more than just the details and facts and figures of what the people were meant to do, God was trying to encourage them about the kind of people that he wanted them to be. He's trying to shape their heart through these laws and through these rules, not just make them into obedient puppets who will do the things that he says. So with that in mind, I want to read these words from Deuteronomy chapter 10 and starting at verse 12, going on to verse 22. In my Bible, its heading is The Essence of the Law. I think it's a good title. We read this. So now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? Only to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord your God and his decrees that I'm commanding you today for your own well-being. Although heaven and the heaven of heavens belong to the Lord your God, the earth with all that is in it, yet the Lord set his heart in love on your ancestors alone and chose you, their descendants after them, out of all the peoples as it is today. Circumcise then the foreskin of your heart, and do not be stubborn any longer. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who is not partial and takes no bribe, who executes justice for the orphan and widow, and who loves the strangers, providing them food and clothing. You shall also love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall fear the Lord your God. Him alone you shall worship. To him you shall hold fast, and by his name you shall swear. He is your praise. He is your God, who has done for you these great and awesome things that your own eyes have seen. Your ancestors went down to Egypt, 70 persons, and now the Lord your God has made you as numerous as the stars in heaven. The essence of the law. What is it that God commands of his people? What is it that he wants of his people? How does he want their hearts to look? How does he want them to be shaped? This passage, it starts off and it makes me laugh a little bit. Because it says, so now, O Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? Simple question. Next word, only. It's going to be a simple thing. Only this. Only to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord your God and his decrees that I'm commanding you today for your own well-being. Just that. Only that. Only that one simple 7 different things listed in a row. Just that. Only that. It's like walking out the door because you realise you need to go to the shops and buy a bottle of milk. Is there anything else you need me to pick up while we're out there? Yeah, if you could also pick up, and then a big long list of things ensues. If you could also do this. Just one little thing that ends up becoming a huge thing. So this long list, fearing the Lord, walking in his ways, loving him, serving him, keeping his commandments, keeping his decrees, all of these things sound a lot like be obedient. What does the Lord require of you? To obey him, to do the things that he tells you to do. One thing I'd want to say about that is that actually we all know that that is in some ways unattainable. To be doing all of that all the time. We know that we cannot do that. We know that we wander, we know that we stray, we know that we get things wrong. We know that if we were actually to adopt this pattern, we'd all be going around with a lot of dots put on us. Of course, we want to live in a world where we get lots of stars. We want to live in this world where the bad things get punished and where the good things get rewarded, because we think of ourselves as being the good people. But actually deep down we know that actually we'd get a fair mix of both. We know that we are broken. We know that we don't always keep what God has asked us to do. But instead of seeing this list as just a big long list of demands, a big long list of do this and do that and obey God and fear him and walk in his ways and get it right all of the time, instead of seeing it as one big list that says that and is a huge guilt trip, I think there's something that brings these things together. I think there is a bottom line. We're on to the next slide, Malcolm. I think there is a bottom line when it comes to all of these things. You can skip on a couple more. Because the bottom line really is not just about obedience. The bottom line is about relationship and obedience. Obedience to God comes out of relationship with him. What does the Lord your God require of you? Only to fear the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God, to keep your commands and decrees for your own well-being. See, there's this mixture of it is your Lord and your God. serve him, fear him, love him. There's a relationship being built there between the people and God. And out of that relationship comes obey the statutes, obey the decrees, keep the commandments of the Lord. See, this relationship and obedience thing, they flow in and out of one another. Maybe in a perfect world, when we're leaving the door and we're going to the shops and we say, is there anything you need me to get? In an ideal world, we shouldn't need to hear anything more than, just get the things you know we need. Sometimes that can be a frustrating thing to hear because the reason for asking the question is that you don't know what it is that we need. But if we know the family that we're part of and we know what situation we're in, then we can know the things that we need to get when we're in that relationship, when we have an understanding of our surroundings, then actually sometimes we don't need to be given a prescriptive list. It's just who we are. We have to know, though, and we have to have been shaped in order to be able to do this properly. What does that mean? Well, God doesn't stop there. He kind of gives a bit of explanation and helps to unpack. Instead of just saying, do all of these things, be obedient to me because you're in a relationship with me. He then goes one step further and starts off by taking a big step back. In verse 14, although heaven and the heaven of heavens belong to the Lord your God, the earth with all that's in it. This is the big God. This is the hugeness of God. Verse 15, yet the Lord set his heart in love on your ancestors alone and chose you. This huge, big, universal, cosmic, Lord of lords, King of all heavens, chose you. Moses says to the people of Israel as they're about to enter the promised land, he chose you. That is where the relationship starts. God has done his bit. God has shown his love for you. God has shown his desire for you. He has chosen you. That's the message under all of these messages, is that God has acted first. God has chosen them. That's where the relationship comes from. That's his bit. Then in verses 16 and 17, he goes on to talk about their bit. Circumcise then the foreskin of your heart. Do not be stubborn any longer. This is their bit. For us, we can see that God has chosen us. We can see that he has found us, that he has saved us, that he has rescued us through his Son. The cross is a demonstration of his love for us, of his choice to put us first. But it doesn't stop there. We then need to work out what our bit is. And all of this obedience is only ever in response to the relationship that God has already given us. And he uses this language, Moses uses this strange language in verse 16, circumcise the foreskin of your heart, circumcise your hearts. What does that mean? That's a very evocative phrase if we care to think about it, which I'm sure many of us don't. But if we care to think about it for a while, it's a very evocative, very big phrase. What does it mean to circumcise our hearts? Well, what is circumcision? What was the point of circumcision? Circumcision was a marker. It was a way of the people of God, they were asked to do it, to mark themselves out as different. To say, this is something we are doing because we are different. It was a way of showing that they were set apart. It was an outward marker that they and others would be able to see that would show that they were different, that they belonged to God. It was a way of putting a mark on themselves to say, I belong to God. I am shaped by God. This is who we are. Circumcision is a marker. So what does circumcision of our hearts mean? What does it mean for them to circumcise their hearts? It's saying that in some way their inner being, their inner reality is set apart, is different, is new. That others would be able to see, that there would be a something decisively different about who they are, that God would have transformed them, not just transformed their actions by giving them a bunch of rules, transformed their hearts, transformed their being, the heart in Jewish thought being the center not just of our emotions, but of our will, of our decisions, of our purpose, of our drive, that all of those things would be different, that there would be a transformation that comes from the inside, not the outside. See, this list may start like God is saying, fear the Lord your God, walk in his ways, love him, serve him, do all of these things, keep the commandments, keep the decrees, and it's a big finger pointing at us. What God is actually saying is, look, I chose you, and I want to shape you. I want to help you to be transformed because I know what's best for you. So let's work on this together. But it starts with your heart, not just your actions. It starts on the inside, not the outside. Later on in the Old Testament, the prophet Ezekiel, in Ezekiel chapter 36, verses 25 to 27, he promises this. This is God's promise over his people. I will sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be clean from all your uncleanness, and from all your idols I will cleanse you. A new heart I will give you, and a new spirit I will put within you. And I will remove from your body the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. This new thing being placed within us, a spirit. And then what do we hear? I will put my spirit within you and make you follow my statutes and be careful to observe my ordinances. See, God wants us to be obedient. Of course he does. He knows what's best for us. He knows what's best for the world. He wants us to follow his ways. He wants all of those things. But he doesn't want it as a mask that we put on. Just sort of fake it till we make it kind of attitude. He wants us to be transformed and therefore act transformed, instead of acting transformed in order to pretend that we've become transformed. He wants to put a new heart within us. Circumcision of the heart is a decision that we need to make, a decision that God's people have always needed to make, that says, yes, I'm willing to be different. I'm willing to be transformed. I'm willing to be set apart. But ultimately, it's God's work in us, giving us that new heart. God's work in us. We have to be open to it. But at the cross, as all of my sin was taken away, God opened up the door to me having a life that is whole, that is holy, that is righteous, that is pure, that is good, that is obedient. To have a heart that is shaped by his. He's gone one step further, though. He's placed his Spirit within us. He's placed his Holy Spirit within us to produce the fruit of that righteousness, to produce the goodness that God wants us to have, to transform us bit by little bit. The process is known as sanctification, or becoming holy. We've been made holy already at the cross. The rest of our lives is an opportunity to grow in that, to deepen that, to allow the Spirit more and more access to who we are. This is about our hearts being changed, not just our actions. And the reason I think that it takes 12 chapters before God really starts to lay out the law for the people is that if he just started with, thus saith the Lord, thou shalt not, then it enables an opportunity for people to become legalistic, to say, well, if I follow the rules, I've got there. He has 12 chapters almost of preamble. Why? Because he wants them to know it's not just about following the letter of the law, it's about being shaped as the people of God. And there is a temptation for us, especially those of us who might think that most of the time we've got things sorted. Most of the time we do the right thing and we get our lives in order pretty well. There's a danger for us to want to live under rule and under law instead of under grace and instead of under freedom, because we think we could do a pretty good job of it. God is constantly reminding his people, no, come back to the relationship. Come back to me. Allow yourself to be transformed inside out instead of trying to get your outside sorted by yourself. There was a moment for me in my life when I am so grateful that God did something with my heart. I don't know if I've talked here before about the story of my calling into what I now do. But from the age of 13 to the age of 17, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't know before the age of 13 as well, but I had no idea. And the one thing I knew I definitely did not want to do was to work in a church and to be a minister. That was the one thing I definitely 100% knew was off the cards. The reason I knew this so certainly was that between those ages of 13 and 17, over those 4 years, 14 different people told me they thought it's what I should do. And my reaction against it every single time was, no, I hate the idea. That is the worst idea anyone could possibly have about how I should spend my time. That is not what I want to do for a living. I love the church. I love Jesus. I want to serve both, but I want to do it like my dad does it. My dad, who has a proper job and who serves God in his own time, who is deeply committed to church. My dad is now a minister as well, but at the time he wasn't. But I knew that's the one thing I didn't want to do. I didn't know what I did want to do, but I knew what I didn't want to do. When I was 17, I went away on a youth weekend away, and during one of the evening sessions, I had a really powerful encounter with God, and he made it very, very clear that I'd been not listening to him for quite a while. He made it very clear that this was what he was asking me to do. That's cool. That's great. I'm excited about that bit of my story. And I like to think that I would have said yes, even if I still hated the idea. The thing I'm most grateful to God for is not giving me a very clear calling and telling me what it was he wanted me to do with my life. The thing I'm most grateful to God for is this. He changed my heart about the whole thing. In a moment, I went from hating the idea to never being able to imagine doing anything else. I am so grateful to God for that. I'm so grateful that instead of just testing my obedience by seeing if I would come kicking and screaming, he made it something that my heart was now in line with. He drew my heart in line with his heart. And I'm so glad he did. Because I think the last 12 years of my life since then would have looked very different and would have been a lot less invigorating had it been a slog instead of being something that I knew, not just that God wanted me to do, but that I wanted as well. This is what I'm talking about God transforming our hearts. Because we can fake it, we can pretend that we're enjoying the stuff that God's asking us to do. We can be obedient and grit our teeth and do it. And sometimes that's what we need to do. Sometimes the things that God is asking us to do are clear. Sometimes the things that God is telling us in Scripture are not okay. It's very clear. And sometimes we wish that it was the other way around. In those times, we do need to have the determination to be obedient nonetheless. But how much better to allow God to be transforming our hearts so that those things that previously seemed like chores become life-giving. And those things that previously seemed like God being a killjoy, we realize are for our own good anyway. But God doesn't stop there. Because as Moses continues to speak, we hear not just about the fact that our hearts should be transformed and circumcision of the heart. We hear about what the heart of God looks like. We hear about a world that looks like justice for everyone. Verse 17, for the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome. Whew, those are some good credentials. Verse 18, who executes justice for the orphan and the widow and who loves the strangers, providing them food and clothing. This God who is king of all the universe and yet is just, who takes no bribes, who is impartial. In the culture into which this was written, the strength of a king, the strength of a ruler, was predominantly seen by how much power they had, and how much wealth and how much esteem and how much clout they had. God, through Moses, is saying that he, as a king, doesn't care about that. He has all of that already. He doesn't need any more of that. He doesn't need more clout, doesn't need more power, doesn't need more status, doesn't need more wealth. He's already got the lot. The kind of king he wants to be is this: one who executes justice for the orphan and the widow, one who looks after the stranger, one who makes sure that his law courts are right and are fair and are not full of corruption and bribery. See, in his kingdom, this is what we should expect. If a king is just and right and good, then the kingdom should. And God is saying, as you go into this new land, I am your king. This is what justice looks like. This is what you need to look like as a people. And it's not so much about whether they've got the status, it's more about how they look after those who can't look after themselves. The orphan, the widow, who at the time would have had very few rights, no inheritance, no power, completely at the whim of others. If others neglected them, they would likely die. If others embraced them and took them in, they would live, and they would flourish, and they would thrive. God is saying, for me, that is the most important thing. That is the heart that I want you to understand through all of the rest of this law. It is about how you are going to live well and how you are going to look after one another and those who need you to look after them. It talks about executing justice for the orphan and the widow. I wonder, in our society today, who are those who cannot look after themselves? Who are those who need people like us to champion them, to fight for them? Who are those who are on the edges of society? Who are those who might feel as though they have no place? Maybe there's there's questions about disability. Maybe there's questions about mental health. Maybe there's questions about race. Maybe there's questions about gender or sexuality. Who are those in our society whose voice is too often not heard? Who are those in our society for whom justice is not their norm and exclusion is? And how is it God might be wanting us to be different? It says in verse 19, "You'll love the stranger, for you also were strangers in the land of Egypt." God is reminding them, you were once in this position. You were the foreigners. You were the slaves. You were those who had no rights and no power. How did you want to be treated? It's what we teach our children, isn't it? Don't do to someone else something you wouldn't want them to do to you. It's what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, treat others as you would like to be treated. And in a society here, where we hear language of creating a deliberately hostile environment for people, how might we want to be different? And how different are we? How welcoming are we? And I don't just mean, although I do mean this, I don't mean just here when we gather, how welcoming are we? How good are we at embracing those who are not normally part of our church family, who are new, who might be different from us in one way or another? Of course that's important. One of our core values is that we will be welcoming. But these core values are not just about when we get together. These core values are about what we as followers of Jesus are to be like everywhere. So how welcoming are you? How welcoming are you to those who are not like you in your places of work? Anyone who's in an environment where they work with other people or spend time with other people will know that from time to time, or maybe all of the time, there are people who are on the edge and there are people who are at the centre. There's the core, the lucky chosen few, and there's those who are a little bit more on the edge. Where do you fit on that spectrum? And are you gravitating towards wanting to be at the core, or are you gravitating towards drawing those in who maybe don't have any power or any status of their own, and who may be able to offer you nothing? These are some of the challenges that God lays on their hearts. And he's saying, look, if you're serious about this work of circumcising your hearts, of being set apart, of being different, of having a transformed heart that leads to a transformed life, this is some of the stuff that looks like. It looks like how you treat those who are less well off than you. It looks like how you look after those who cannot look after themselves. And yeah, it gets on to bigger and more complicated things. But it never moves past those things. When you look at the life of Jesus and who he chose to spend time with, and how much time he had for those who really couldn't offer him an awful lot. We see a model of a life lived well. One of the things God says that displays our hearts most clearly is this: how do we treat people? Yes, how do we treat the rich, and how do we treat the wealthy, and how do we treat those in power? But how do we treat those who have none of those things? And really, another way of asking that question is, how's your heart? Has your heart become more like God's? God who does execute justice perfectly and purely. God who does look for those who are on the outside. How's your heart this morning? Do you feel as though your heart is being transformed? Can you see ways in which the way that you see others, the way that you see yourself, the way that you see the world has changed in the last week, in the last year, in the last 10 years? Can you see that work of transformation going on? Is God making you more compassionate? Is God making you more kind? Title of this message, title of this morning, Choosing God's Ways. In some ways doesn't sum it up. Maybe choosing God's heart. Choosing God's values. Is that something we're committed to? I believe the world can be changed when people look different, when people behave different. But we'll only look different and behave different consistently and well if it's because we've been made different. So I'd like to invite you to pray with me. You might like to signify an open heart by putting open hands. You might like to close your eyes. You might like to do any or all or none of the above. But I'd like to pray that God would be shaping us as I invite the guys to come back and lead us again. Father, I pray that you would take my heart and the bits of it that are cold or hard or rusty or wrong. I pray that you would soften. In fact, not soften. I pray you'd remove. You've promised to remove our heart of stone and give us a heart of flesh. I pray that once again this morning you would pour your Spirit into me and into us. I want to be someone who pursues your justice, who pursues your compassion and your kindness and your goodness. And I know that can't come from me. So, King of the universe, I pray, would you transform me and make me more like you? And would that be our legacy and our story, more and more each day? In the name of our King Jesus, I pray.